And after this meeting, when we update the document, Allison, if you'll remind me, we can send out the corrected version of that document to all of you. But what I'm going to be sharing with you is the corrected version. So there's a little bit of confusion about some of Choice's forecasts, because it had some of last year and some of this year. So I think we've got that all correct now. And what I will do now is I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see ACRL Budget Assumptions 2020? You can either say yes or nod. Thank you for the nods. I appreciate it. So unless someone has another suggestion for how you'd like to engage with this document, I propose just sort of walking through it, and I will sort of give a short big picture, let you respond and see if there's anything you want to change, or if you're just ready to move on to the next session. Does that sound all right, or does anybody have another idea? I see at least one head nod too, so I am going to proceed.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
I'm back online, by the way.
Oh, good. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
We want you to be completely up to date
Hallelujah.
on what we're doing. Excellent. So this first couple paragraphs just lays out the process and that I just said, and then we get into the general economic climate and ACRL. And really, with all these citations and things, I'm basically saying that I don't see any big uptick in funding for higher education since the Great Recession. Even though recession is 10 years ago, I'm not finding any data that shows that we're really ever going to bounce back to those days of money coming in. And I can tell you, as someone who's been around for a while, in the 2000s, we still didn't think we were funded the way people talked about being funded in the 60s and the 70s. So, you know, higher ed is just not going to bounce back. Enrollment maybe was going to come up a little bit, but it's still slowing down. Our membership continues to decline. Some of that may be because we have, you'll notice here, a 33.8% drop in master's degrees awarded between 2012 and 2016. And then between 2014 and 2018, we've had about 20% of those graduates placed in academic and research libraries. So, you know, jobs are supposed to be getting better, but that's sort of what I'm seeing from the data. Does anybody have anything different or want to offer a more nuanced approach or a more hopeful picture of buckets of money out there that libraries are going to have access to? Don't all talk at once.
I wonder if it's different. I remember an ACRL presentation from Constance Malpass that talked about how it's different for community colleges, for mid-sized schools versus for large universities that are not like that. That when there are three things, the middle thing tends to go away or suffer. And the big universities are never going to struggle to find students, and the cheapy, like if it's affordable education, that's not going to struggle, but the mid-sized places are going to really struggle. And I wonder if that's true. I feel like that's true in terms of politics, especially like the politics on universities. It feels like the mid-sized ones are really struggling for identity. I don't know. I think about it in terms of like, why are the vendors still charging us so much money for stuff? And they know there's money to be made in higher ed, but, you know, that money's not landing in library coffers. So I don't know. And it also occurs to me that like when the economy does better, I guess they always say when the economy's bad, a lot of people go back to school. And so, like, as the economy's been a little bit better, there have been more little schools closing. I don't know. Just like, those are some of the things I'm thinking about these days.
Yeah, I think those are good points. And if you, in the next couple of weeks, if any of you bump into some articles, and I'll look a little bit more too, that we can add some data to this paragraph, I'm happy to do it. I know that sort of resonates with when I was meeting with folks at a Council of Independent Colleges workshop, this feeling that those small private schools particularly, and there were a number of small private, originally founded on religious purposes schools, that how are they going to survive? You know, is that niche survivable. And as you can see here, we found the data that another 330 schools closed last year and 675 the year before. Now, admittedly, I suspect that a number of those are those for-profit institutions that are, Betsy DeVos doesn't want students to be able to sue to get their money back. But it's still a change in the environment. So with all those factors, that with less money coming into libraries, that may mean less staff. And although I didn't go into it here, but I also hear from some of our colleagues at the larger Research One institutions is that they're not necessarily hiring MLSs. And if they're not MLISs working in academic libraries, there may or may not be an interest, and ACRL may or may not have the programs and services of interest to them. You know, I've said before, ACRL is never going to compete with EDUCAUSE. So if you have IT people working in the library, we have not deployed resources to try and develop programs that would help those, you know, IT people see that there's a value in belonging to ACRL as well. So moving along, this just sort of, the next paragraph just sort of reinforces the point that there's fewer librarians, and I think more opportunities for librarians to participate in other places where institutions pay the dues, in the sense that there's Hathi Trust and the Digital Library Federation and lots of smaller specialized organizations coming up that don't require someone to pay dues, but do allow them to participate on committees and things like that. In this next section, we get into more of the national and international politics and the fragility of the stock market and what that means. I mean, it's almost depressing to open the news feed every day in terms of hearing about nuclear arms races again. It's just sort of startling, but even with the overall growth in the economy going to 3.1%, higher ed is forecasting just a 2.8% increase, so a little bit down. And state spending on higher ed has not bounced back and is down from previous years. And here, a little bit to your point, Georgie, funding for public 2- and 4-year colleges is well below pre-recession levels in almost every state. And in only 6 states have higher ed budgets returned to or surpassed pre-recession levels. And in 19 states, at least 20% below levels before the recession. It's kind of depressing.
Mary Ellen, I'm sorry, this is Carolyn.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said about membership and Hathi Trust and people's participation. Many of those organizations are quote unquote membership organizations, and the vast majority of academic libraries do not belong to them. They don't have access to that material. So I'm not so sure that that's a reason why people aren't becoming a part of ACRL. I think it has more to do with the lack of funding internally and their ability to participate based on travel or lack of travel money within the institutions.
And that could be as well. Admittedly, as I go to conferences and things, and I get invited by ARL to go to their membership meetings twice a year, I'm going to see a different slice of the world than I do from some of the other groups. And in that slice of the world, I see their staff participating, you know, because the organization is paying those dues, and the deans are going to those meetings, and they are forming all these working groups and stuff. But I think I take your point that as funding for libraries is down and funding for higher ed is down, just funding is down as well, then librarians don't have the money to travel and do things. And I think we've had a hard time breaking down the barrier that you don't have to come to conference to participate in many ACRL committees and things. There's still this sense that if I can't go to conference, then I can't volunteer, which is not accurate. I think we do expect the board of directors to appear. And while we'd love to have the Budget and Finance Committee come, we have worked on virtual meetings and things like that. And we're seeing far fewer ACRL committees schedule meetings at midwinter. ELOIS is more than a full-time job, practically keeping up with all the virtual meetings that get scheduled for our committees and sections that are electing not to come to an ALA midwinter meeting. And we have some membership research that we can share with Budget and Finance Committee too, if that's of interest. It kind of is explaining why they, what people are looking for in ACRL and why they do or do not participate. So
I think that information would be very useful.
all right,
thank you.
Yeah, we'll share that. Allison, if you could add that to the tickler, that we'll put that on the Budget and Finance Committee agenda, and maybe that's a topic that would be of interest. We've been looking for when the board can talk about the membership study, and maybe that's something to talk about at the joint meeting at midwinter. We're going to have to come up with some topics for that, and that might be a good one to dig into. So another challenge we've had is the consolidation of vendors. We're certainly noticing this as we sell exhibit space, as we look for sponsorships, as we look for vendors to sponsor our awards. Through mergers and acquisitions, we now have one vendor that I think is sponsoring at least 5 or 6 of ACRL awards, where they all had been sponsored by, where they've been sponsored by 6 different companies before. And so now our hat is in our hand. One company has got that much power over so many of our awards is a little daunting. So, with all that being said, and with Carolyn's point that librarians have less money to spend, less likely to join, we're looking at how much revenue we can bring in from the sales of books and webinars and conferences and classified ads and that kind of thing to kind of build this budget. Did anybody have anything else to add to the environmental piece before we kind of get to our net asset balance? I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to make sure everybody has a chance to say something if they want to. All right, well, I am counting on you to say, wait, Mary Ellen, if I'm going too fast. It's always a little hard to know. So, ACRL still ended FY18 after transferring some money to Choice to support some of its initiatives and purposely spending down $700,000 last year. We still have $3.4 million in our net asset balance, which we're getting closer to the point of how much money we want to have on hand. And we're hopeful that FY19 will have a successful conference where generally we've returned another $300,000 or $500,000 to our net asset balance. So we'll see how that does. So we're still looking at how we can invest some of this money into programs and services that serve the members. And I've given a few examples here. And we'll continue to do the swap with Choice where, or we can look next year, but at the moment we have planned to have Choice give us $350,000 from their long-term investment to ours, and in return we'll give them $350,000 from our net asset balance to help them have some innovative money for new products and services. Now here you say, you can see I've said you've reviewed them and we've made changes. Obviously this is a draft document that we'll finalize for the board. Here we have the basic Choice assumptions, and Choice is a small publisher, is sort of under the traditional challenges that publishing houses have, that there is, decentralized information discovery. The stuff is available on the web. There's smaller materials budgets. There's other ways of doing collection development, consolidation of purchasing and management in the hands of a few vendors, which could reduce our licensing revenue. So we're feeling all those kinds of price pressures and disintermediation of the collection development librarian. But we're, persevering and we're looking for new things. So we did the CC Advisor with the Charleston company, and although it's had a successful launch, it has not brought in as much revenue as we had hoped. Open Choice we were exploring and had hoped that we could come up with a revenue generating product from that, but as I'll go into a little bit later, we've got reviewers, we've got people that are interested, we've got a great review template, but we haven't been able to come up with a business model, and the partnerships we had been pursuing have fallen apart. So we are still looking to how to make that work, or whether we need to do something else. So here we go into a little bit more detail about the magazine and the fact that circulation really has been pretty flat. The idea that there's only been a variance of 13 subscriptions over the past 6 years is kind of amazing. But we're still serving over 40% of the marketplace. So there are still libraries that are subscribing to it, even if the big ones are less inclined to look at a review before they make a purchase. Of course, print revenues are going to decline because more people, and we want more people to use the database rather than the print. As I mentioned earlier, the licensing is challenged, and when there's a big licensor like ProQuest and they've said, we're not going to pay you as much for that, we don't have a lot of negotiation space. So it's like we either take what their offer is or we don't have anything at all. So we have had some decline in the royalties, but this licensing revenue has been important to Choice's financial stability. And here we talk about CC Advisor in a little bit more detail. And I don't want to read this to you. So as I pass through these sections, if you have any questions about them, please speak up. Here, and we'll give you in the board a bit more a detailed update on Open Choice. But just as I said, although there's a lot of interest in this product, we're not finding that there's a lot of money to invest in a sort of campus-wide top-down system for this. So we're still looking for a business model. We're still looking for, is there a niche in this marketplace that we can use to generate revenue? But the big system that we had envisioned doesn't seem like it's going to work, but we haven't given up. This team is hard at work looking at other ways that we might be able to serve the students in the libraries and the faculty in the OER marketplace. But some other people have gotten to the marketplace faster than we could, and so people are working with Oasis and things like that in a way that that we can't compete with. Advertising and sponsorships tended to be down a little bit. We're hoping they'll rebound this year. The sponsored webinar program continues to be very successful. Thousands of people sign up for those webinars and take them and give them good evaluations. And then podcasts are coming back in favor. You know, for a while podcasts were hot and then they kind of disappeared, and now they're back again, and with more and more downloads and things. You know, an average of nearly 1,000 downloads and streams for each of the episodes, and so we are selling sponsorships of those podcasts, which is another initiative. And then the sponsored content with these two papers brought in some sponsorship revenue. So we'll continue to look at sponsored content, which we've worked with the board and the Budget and Finance Committee, I think just at midwinter, where we hammered out a statement about working with vendors to ensure that there's a bright line between editorial control and sponsorship. And we've lost some sponsors that way, which is okay, because they wanted control over the content. And we said, no, for us to protect our brand reputation as the content developer, we are going to have that control, and you're not going to influence that. So we're going to keep working on ideas. We'll get into more of the specifics a little bit later in the document. And then these are just our general assumptions that will follow all the policies, that will charge salaries and benefits to each project based on time studies, that we try and, that the non-serial pubs, the book sales are going to be operated on cost recovery basis as professional development, as well as we're trying to make those bring in some excess revenue. And then we're still using a modified accrual accounting. Those of you that have been on the committee the last couple of years will know that ALA told me we were going to move to full accrual accounting, and I said, fine, as long as you can get me reports easily that I can have access to that lets me see what expenses are going out. And they haven't been able to do that, so they've still left us on this modified accrual. And what that means is that if you think of the ACRL budget like a checking account, the expenses get debited from our account as we spend them. But the money coming in, and this is the accrual part, doesn't get credited until we offer that event. So we've taken in over I think over $250,000, close to $300,000 in sponsorships for the ACRL conference in April. None of that revenue has hit the bottom line of the ACRL budget, but we will see it next April when we have the event. And the purpose of that accrual accounting, for those of you that are new, is just in the hopefully never to happen, but in the unusual circumstance that we didn't hold that conference for whatever reason, then we could give all that money back. Because if we don't deliver, then we can't keep the money. So that's the purpose of accrual accounting. If we had easy access to reports, then the idea of it would be all the expenses would also be deferred. The bills would get paid if we had a bill the year before, but it wouldn't hit our checking account, so to speak, until we had delivered that service. And so then the revenues would cover the expenses. Since we're not doing that, then we always have a deficit in the year prior to the conference as we pay those conference bills. And it takes about $250,000 of staff time, salaries, and down payments on things in the non-conference year. So FY20 will be a non-conference year, so we expect to be at a minimum of $250,000 in the hole just to plan the conference. Primary revenue is going to be education, publications, dues, and donations. Because of those swaps with choice, as well as us continuing to invest in our long-term long-term investment, as well as how well the stock market did last year. I don't know about this year, but last year it did well. We have nearly $5 million in our long-term investments, so we should kick off at least $135,000 in interest income that we can show in the operating budget. And that was the point of building up our endowment, was so that we could show, generate some revenue for the operating budget. We're going to fill all the positions. I put in this year's budget, and I intend to continue for next year, filling a Diversity Alliance resident so that ACRL can be a member of the Diversity Alliance even as it's hosting it, and create an opportunity for a recent library school graduate to get some work experience at the association. And then now we're going into the goal parts. And so for the value of academic libraries, we're going to budget money for practitioner scholars to carry out action research questions. This is a typo right here. That should be June 2020, I think. I'll double check with the staff, but obviously 2017 is long gone. And we're also going to budget for people to go out and present to higher education, as well as money to update the dashboard OCLC created for us as part of the research agenda. And then just some miscellaneous money, so the committee has some money to do projects that advance the strategic plan. Student learning, we keep the sandbox up to date every year. Have some 10,000 is kind of the amount we put in for each goal area committee, so that if they think of new initiatives throughout the year, they have some projects. And then the immersion program, they're planning one national and at least one regional program. And we'll have to fund money. The way we do some of our road shows and presenters and stuff is sort of an observer thing. As we bring new faculty or new presenters in, we like to send them out to one where they're not responsible for presenting, but they get that opportunity to observe and participate in the session, so that they're then more prepared to present when it's their turn to go out. And research and scholarly environment will continue the road shows and subsidize some of those, because we also see scholarly communication as an advocacy arm of ACRL, and then supporting people to go out and present at higher ed conferences. And then this money to carry out projects that we will have been identified in the research agenda, which we are waiting for the consultants to get that research agenda back. More presentation, and then dues, the Library Copyright Alliance, Open Access Working Group, Spark, Counter, all those kinds of things. And here we have new roles and changing landscapes, which for purposes of the budget, we've said the Diversity Alliance sort of falls under new roles and changing landscapes. And so we expect to have dues of at least $25,000 from members of that, and then some new initiative money. And the committee is working on, has just issued a call for curriculum designers for an online course on change management. And so we think there'll be a few more costs in the FY20 budget as well to maintain that.
Oh,
So
hey,
those are our goal areas. Yes.
We have a question in the comment box from Fanny.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Fanny. I don't have my chat box open. Can you read the question while I look for how to find my chat box?
If you just hover along the bottom, there should be a chat icon, but I can read the question. It says, are we doing any programming for open access other than meeting?
Well, the programming, part of it is the advocacy work where we participate with the Open Access Working Group and other higher ed organizations and Spark to do that. There are conferences, we send people to programs. There's the Scholarly Communication Toolkit that's on the web, and we've had some publications. I don't know if that gets to what you're thinking, Fanny, or if you've got a specific idea.
And everyone, please feel free to unmute your mics if you want to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Elois. That's a good reminder.
All right. Oh, do you see the chat box now?
Yeah, I've got it open. So, well, it's on our website with the road shows and with the toolkit, and is a member of Spark and is a sponsor at the OpenCon conference. So, I mean, I don't think ACRL will have the same prominence as Spark does, because that's Spark's entire reason for being, is to work on open access and OER kinds of things. So I don't know if that's quite what you mean, or if you have other places where you think ACRL needs to engage.
Excuse me, this is Carolyn. I can speak a little bit about the roadshows, since we did one here. They're highly effective, and people from all over the region attended. So that's a good way of participating in the open access initiatives and scholarly communications. If you are able to do something at your library, that funding can go towards helping you to put forth a program, and then you can invite participation of others. We did charge a small fee because we had to pay for the room, but all in all, I think we had about 50 to 60 participants. It was very well received.
That's terrific. And as Fanny's question made me think that there may be things that we can do to prep our presenters better, to make sure there's a little bit of an ACRL spiel as well as the open access spiel, to make sure there's information about ACRL and, you know, that it's brought to you, and that might help reinforce the brand of ACRL. So I can talk to the team about that in terms of across all of ACRL's programs and services. All right, well, in the interest of time, I think I'll move on, but thank you for that question, Fanny, and the rest of you. As Elois said, you just jump in, unmute your mic, or I've got the chat box open now. I found it, so we can feel free to ask questions there, and thank you for your help, Allison. So now we get to this part of the strategic plan that we call the enabling programs and services, and those are those things that sort of are maybe the business lines of the organization that keep the organization running, but are not necessarily considered the strategic part of the plan. They're the business as usual. So, you know, membership, unfortunately, continues to decline in a non-conference year. We try to hold the decline to a smaller number, but we still predict a decline. I'd love to turn that around. The membership study shows that some people really don't want to join ALA, so they're never going to join ACRL. Also, as Carolyn pointed out, people just don't have the money, and they're not choosing to spend it on the association. There's some changes happening at the ALA membership team, and I'm hoping that they'll hire somebody that has some good ideas about how to better articulate the value of ALA membership. Some of the membership research that ALA did show there's a portion of academics that really just see ALA as a gate that they have to go through to get to ACRL. And so we'd love it if ALA if we could work with ALA so there's a more positive value proposition for both organizations. One of the things you'll do this year is recommend whether or not we should raise the ACRL dues as we look at the HEPI index. We'll talk about that more at midwinter, but we won't start with a dues increase in the budget. We'll keep that flat and then see what you all think as we go along. And we'll support, increase it to 5 ALA emerging leaders, and we've put some wraps on our print CNRL news in terms of members, welcome and reinstates, that kind of thing. Have some funding for food at Leadership Council, support a Spectrum Scholar. We always put in about $50,000 for strategic initiatives because ideas come up along the year. We don't always spend it, sometimes we do, but that way there's money in the budget if the board has some ideas or if a committee has some ideas. Then we're funding a strategic planning meeting with the board and the goal area committee chairs each fall. We have a new person managing our consulting services, and she has some really good ideas for marketing and expanding the services. So we're going to start out with an ambitious budget in consulting and see if we can make that work. We'll adjust that later in the year if some of the ideas that we try this year don't seem to be taking off, but I think she has some really good ideas. In fact, as I came from the OCLC event, I was stopped by a dean who said, how do I find someone that could help us do an external review? And I said, well, since you asked, ACRL has a consulting service that does just that, and we'd be glad to talk to you about that. So we'll see. Let's see. The awards is sort of, we get the money in from sponsors for the awards, but there is more staff time than we get in for administrative support. Chapters will budget for their allocation. They get reimbursed for educational expenses. Committees usually don't ask for a lot of money. What typically outside of the goal area committees, typically money had been used to reimburse for sort of that administrative level expense with things like voice over IP and not needing to mail things. It hasn't been as needed. Some more dues in the government relations. They pay for half of the Copyright Alliance membership, and if we want the officers to go to the legislative day in Washington, D.C., and some more travel for advocacy, and then we'll budget money for scholarships to our programs. Money for the President's Program and annual conference programs at ALA. We're expecting non-periodical publications to continue to do well. They had net revenues of about $50,000 this year, so we're hoping that will continue. Our statistics program did well this year and had net revenues, and we have a new product launching on academic library buildings that we expect to at least break even in the first year and then to generate new revenue. The standards for libraries in higher ed and IL framework, we've been mailing out booklets upon request for very minimal fee, and we may do a small price hike on that to try and better recover our postage costs and our staff costs.
That's probably a good idea, but I will say that we get some feedback. I'm the chair of the editorial board for the Trends and Stats, and there's a lot of feedback that if these are our data, that we should be able to access them for free, and people get irritable about the charge, which is really modest for subscribing to Counting Opinions. So I just want to make sure that I've said that out loud, that that's a not infrequent thing that we get in the text comment.
Oh, I thank you, Georgie. You are absolutely right. I understand. I wish that we had so much more money coming in from something else that we could give people that share their data back for free, but we pay Counting Opinions. I mean, you know better than I do, I'm sure, or as well as I do in terms of working with Mary Jane and the editorial board, that it isn't free to put that data into a system that other people can access. And that data is really helpful, I think, to people. As I was talking to this dean, one of the things, his eyes lit up when I said we could help you with ACRL metrics, run reports and do peer comparisons to show data about how your library is doing against some of the other libraries. yes, I wish that our dues covered all expenses that we had. Then we wouldn't have to charge for anything. Unfortunately, dues are about $600,000, and we have about a $3 million budget. So there's a lot of other revenue that we have to bring in to do that. But you're right. I'm sensitive to that, which is why we try to keep pricing minimal, but we've got to bring in enough revenue to sort of sustain the services that people want to. CRL, we have a little bit of online advertising, but not a ton. Subscriptions, we have a few, but they continue to drop off for CRL News. Product ads were down this year, but we're hoping that we can keep things even with this year. Classified ad revenues, it's amazing to me that we're still able to keep that business going. And just as a reminder, we split the revenue and expenses 50-50 with American Libraries. So we still are bringing in about $800,000 a year in people advertising their jobs. So I think, ACRL gets $400,000 of that, but I think we're seen as a trusted resource. And David Connolly, our staff member, does a great job of positioning that and updating the interface for people and finding a good vendor to do that for us. And print, the idea that anybody is buying a print ad in a monthly news magazine is sort of astounding to me. We still have a couple, and I know academic searches can take a while, but I think those are going to go away. We'll keep the print at basic levels. RBM went open access. The subscriptions aren't falling off as fast as we expected, so we'll see. And it's going to be challenging to keep this breaking even if we can't keep the product advertising up, and if we keep printing a print version as opposed to just making it online. So we'll just have to monitor that situation. We're saving some money by moving from Highwire last year to OJS, and also the other thing we're doing to be a good citizen is that money that we are spending with OJS, we're spending with the ALA publishing services, so that the money is staying in-house, if you will, rather than going to an outside provider, so that helps ALA. And then choice, the online database subscription will go a bit, but the magazines will continue to decline. Licensing, we talked about, kind of always is a bit on edge of whether we'll be able to keep that or not. And advertising had dropped, but we're hoping it's going to stabilize or remain flat. And we'll keep looking at other innovative products or sponsored content where things will go well. And the webinars continue to be of interest to advertisers and to members alike. And Choice as a publication, just as a reminder, pays half of the overhead rate. So it'd be 13.2% or 2.5, I guess, while conferences would pay the 26.5%. But we're looking kind of at a flat level for FY18. And I recognize we're down to the last 15 minutes. So let me kind of keep picking up the pace here. We want to break even on conference, but it's a spend down year next year, so we'll have at least $250,000 in the hole. Other workshops and our road shows will at least break even or generate some revenue. RBMS continues to grow and do very well and raise a lot of money in its fundraising, which then goes into net profit, which often RBMS has plowed back into giving scholarships so that more people come to the conference, so that they've really established a good habit of giving. In FY18, our webinars had a fantastic year, our paid webinars, because we came up with I credit staff with coming up with a 6-volume series of webcasts and books on the InfoLit framework, and those were very popular and generated money. So we'll see if we can come up with another blockbuster program like that. And we still give 2 complimentary webcasts to the chapters. And our licensed workshops, are what we call our road shows, did really well last year. I think there is a great demand for local education and bringing people to the region rather than trying to fly everybody out to a national conference. For those that can afford it, we still think the national conference is a great opportunity to bring a lot of people together, but for more targeted learning, rather than sending 5 or 6 team members, if you can bring in some presenters from ACRL, those have been going really well. And in fact, I think we sent people to 5 or 6 different countries last year as well. So there's even some international interest in these road shows. And they cover all their expenses, but they did generate a lot excess revenue last year, which is terrific. Still budget money to belong to other organizations, to send member leaders to other organizations to present through our external liaisons program. And project outcome, I'd like to, if she's willing to stay, keep our ACLS public fellow on for an additional year. So I'm going to put money in the budget for that. And that will really help with the outreach for project outcome. We're learning a lot from PLA, and they said that it really took a lot of presentations at conferences and working with the community to help them understand how they could use project outcomes in their libraries. So we'll budget for that.
Mary Ellen, this is Brian. I had a question about the web maintenance costs for this. So is that through some sort of outside firm, or is that through ALA? How is that covered?
Oh, that's outside. ALA has no capacity to take on a project like this. So this is an outside consulting firm that does database stuff. Yeah, and we're actually cloning sort of the database that PLA paid to develop. So we're spending a lot less on it than if we had started from scratch, but it still takes outside support to do this. And I'm hoping it won't be $50,000 every year, but I've got to look into that and see whether that's an annual maintenance cost or what. The decision was made to offer this as a free service the way PLA did. Of course, PLA has $10 million worth of Gates grant money, but I think we're also looking at if it gets going in the community, are there value added services and products that could go with this that would generate some revenue, so that you get kind of the basic, sort of the premium, the freemium and the premium kind of model. You get the basic for free, and then there might be some other products and services we can build on that to generate some revenue. But I do think it'll be helpful for the profession to get some outcome sorts of benchmarks. So I'm hoping that people will take us up on that and start to use it. And the other reason that we were interested in it is that there were academic libraries signing up for the PLA and trying to make the public library model work in their academic libraries. So when the board looked at that, they really thought this was worth investing some of that net asset balance into. And we have been working closely with the PLA staff, and so we need to reimburse them for some of their support of the project. So we'll be doing that. I mentioned the Diversity Alliance staff resident. We'll fund all the staff positions. The LTI I've mentioned a couple times, they're just in different sections. We're expecting that ACRL, because it's a non-conference year, would probably give ALA about $200,000 in overhead, and Choice about $400,000 in overhead based on projected revenues. Oh, well, good. I'm closer to the end than I thought. I don't know. My little thing kept saying I was on page 14 of 24, so I don't know why. It must not interface with with the Zoom. But we're at the end. So, and I thought I had 10 more pages I was going to have to get through in 8 minutes, and I couldn't imagine what was on the next 10 pages. So we finished. Does anybody have any questions, other questions, suggestions?
This is Brian. I had another question. Do you think that the potential merger of Llama and Alex and Lita will have any impact on membership for ACRL?
I really don't know. What do you think?
I'm really not sure. I mean, if that merger goes through, which it looks likely that it may, this will be a division that will be about the same size as ACRL or PLA.
I don't think so. I think there's enough overlap in those three. I don't think they'd be at 10,000.
Well, no, they would be smaller, but I mean, even an 8,000 member organization would kind of put them in a different light than, you know, a 2,000 or 3,000 member organization.
Yeah, it could. I haven't looked at their overlap numbers, and I haven't looked at their documents real closely to know whether if they each have 2,000 or 3,000 people, how many of them are duplicative and how many of them are unique members. I think the challenge for the new organization would be what programs and services are they going to offer, and are they going to be competitive with this? I mean, and of course, all of this is on the backdrop is that ALA has this organizational effectiveness task force that has been told to, if you were to kind of invent ALA today, what would it look like? And so, you know, will there still be divisions? Will the operating agreement as we know it still exist? Will there be different ways of buying services from each other? Will the dues, you know, we've got 5 consultants out doing 5 sets of reports for ALA. So I'd say the only constant is change. And so it's hard to know exactly what, if any, effect that would have on membership. It certainly, we shouldn't just assume that people would join ACRL if they develop programs and services that are more attractive, and we're seeing that people have less money to spend. But what everything's going to look like going forward is a bit of a mystery at the moment. Do other people have a sense of, in terms of tracking that merger, whether that will be a big competitor for us or what that will really mean?
Not a clue. Sorry.
I am maybe more so concerned about the effectiveness ALA work and what that's going to mean for us. And I admit that I have, like, since we talked at ALA annual, I have not heard anything. I haven't, if there's been stuff about, you know, preliminary findings or suggestions, I haven't read them. I haven't kept up with it. So I just don't know what's going on with that. And that's always a little scary.
You haven't missed anything, Georgie. The Effectiveness Task Force, I believe, had their first conference call last week, and they're meeting, I think, this week, early next week, or in the next week or so. They're having their first 2-day meeting out in a conference center outside of Chicago. So I think what is interesting is whether they'll really be able to keep to the timeline, which is sort of like a report biannual conference that people can start taking action on. So it'll be interesting to see what that does. So one of the things that I think happened after annual is that ACRL successfully lobbied ALA to have an ACRL representative on that group, because there were several from public libraries and other groups, but nothing from ACRL. And so Emily Daly, who's on the ACRL board of directors and who works at Duke, is ACRL's representative on the task force, and she has promised to provide a report for the board's fall meetings. That'll be a public document, so you'll be able to keep up there with, you know, in terms of what they're doing. And they're working with Paul Meyer from Tecker International, who we have worked with for strategic planning. So that's who they've hired as the consultant to work with that ALA group.
That's all good news. I also saw on Jim Neal's Facebook that he was going to run for council because he wanted to keep up with his work that he's been doing on institutional change in ALA. So there you go. Maybe he's guessing that it's going to take longer than just this term. So
yeah, it could be. I mean, ALA is a behemoth, and to have as many balls up in the air right now, it's a lot of change for everybody, and a lot of unknown for everybody, members and staff alike. We have 3 minutes left. Any other questions or observations? I mean, we're doing these budget assumptions in a bit of uncertainty, both in the ALA environment as well as in what the broader U.S. and international environment is like. But I'm not hearing anybody correct our assumptions that higher ed is still a bit under the gun and that funding is still a bit underfunded, shall we say. Higher ed is underfunded.
I think you're not hearing anything because we all know that our budgets are not increasing more than 2 to 3%, if that much. and the trend data nationally certainly points in this direction. So I think we've made some pretty good assumptions. I don't get the sense that anyone is getting large percentage increases if you're a state institution. Those budgets have been flat for a long time, and some institutions have even lost money. So we're relying much more on fundraising than we are actually budgets being supported by the institution.
Mm-hmm.
We are finding that typically the state budget is between 40 and 60% of the overall budget, and the rest is dollars that come in through grants and or endowments.
Endowments are also up in the air because there's so much tied to the stock market.
Well, I can tell you, fundraising has not been pleasant this year.
Yeah, I guess it's all connected then, isn't it?
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, it's not that we're not raising money, but we're not raising it at the rate that we were, and the gifts are not as large.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost counterintuitive. If the stock market was having such a surge, you'd think that people would feel wealthier and then have more to give. But maybe the uncertainty of how long that bubble will last has people nervous.
Yeah, now that they've got it, they're afraid to lose it again.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate everybody's time and thought. Please delete the copy I sent you last night because it had the old choice information in there as well as the new choice information. Thank you to Ricky for spotting that. And we'll send you a corrected version. And if anyone finds some resources or references we can use to Georgie's point about the recession hitting different kinds of institutions, or not the recession, but funding being experienced by different kinds of institutions in different ways, other than what I have in there about the state and the 2-year, I'm happy to incorporate that. I think we have another week or two before we have to share the document with the board. And as Carolyn said at the beginning, these are sort of living documents. So something really happens to change our environment, we're not going to keep budgeting the way we said on October 25th. We'll update our expectations and our assumptions and adapt as we need to for the budget. So with that, Allison will be sending you, we'll be working with Carolyn to put together budget agendas and documents for the midwinter meeting. And if you have ideas or other things that you want to work on, we'll put out a call for agenda items and things. And we look forward to hearing from you. We're always here to answer your questions or to take your input. So we certainly appreciate your time and attention to this.
Great. Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everybody. Yeah.
Bye.
I heard my name. Did somebody have a question, comment? Maybe they just said goodbye. Okay. All right. I just heard Mary Ellen, so I stopped. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.